start, which was great because I was about to fall into a yoga trance. Welcome all of you to this session on creating a global skills framework. Before we start, I want to remind you that we encourage, or the World Economic Forum encourages participation. For those of you who are not in the room, do comment, do get involved. Hashtag WEF22 is the hashtag, as you probably know, by the end of today. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation because it's one where I'm going to learn a lot. So we're going to talk about creating a global skills framework, which, right now in the period of the great resignation, the massive skills shortage, nothing could be more important than having an effective approach to hiring. This is part of the forum's reskilling revolution, which in addition to being pleasingly alliterative, is an incredibly ambitious plan where 1 billion people are going to be reskilled by the partners of the WEF in this ambitious 10-year program. And I'm told that already 102 million people have benefited from this. So that's pretty impressive. You've still got a way to go, though. And we are, I hope, going to make at least a small dent in thinking through the intellectual framework of this in the next 45 minutes. And the one statistic that I read in my preparatory materials that struck me is that I'm told skills-based approach to hiring is 5 times as effective for delivering job success for entry-level employees as a focus on qualifications. So I want to understand how it works, how you make it that effective, and how we can make it even more mainstream. A fantastic group to discuss this, and I will briefly introduce you. Josephine Teo is Minister of Communications and Information of Singapore. Welcome. Alan Blue, you are co-founder and vice president of products at LinkedIn. And Manny Maceda, Chief Executive Officer of Bain & Company in the USA. And Shabana Kamineni, Executive Vice Chairperson, Apollo Hospitals Enterprise in India. Welcome to all of you. Josephine, can we start with you? Because Singapore is a leader in this space, as in so many other things, developing a national skills framework. So tell us kind of what you've done, what you've learned, and we'll then go on to what others should learn not to do. But let's start with what you've done and what you've learned.
Well, perhaps one way of looking at it is the kind of impact that it's made. But I think maybe as background, it's really important for Singapore, that we think in terms of the labor market outcomes, and there are really 3. We'd like to keep employment high. We'd like to make sure that unemployment stays low. And very importantly, for how people feel about progress in the country, we'd like to see sustainable wage growth. So these are the kind of labor market outcomes that we were trying to achieve. But if you look at how mature our economy is and how open it is, obviously this is going to be an ongoing challenge. And one of the things that we grapple with all the time is that industries and business models are being continuously disrupted. So jobs may disappear, or they demand very, very different skills. So if you then consider that these are structural changes that are not going to go away, what it really requires is a very, very steady pace of cross-skilling, reskilling, upskilling. Because if this was not achieved on a consistent basis at scale, then what would really present itself would be some, trending up of unemployment, as well as employment losing ground. So quite fortunately for us, there's been a forestalling of this phenomenon, which we've always been very concerned about. And it's been accomplished by a combination of factors. A lot of effort on the part of individuals, because clearly they have to invest the time, the effort in order to be reskilled. On the part of employers, because they have to recognize that jobs may disappear, but people are not going to disappear. And they're better off, investing also in helping people to transit into new business roles. But we are also very practical. At the end of the day, this is expensive business. Government resources have to be brought to bear. And that's what we've been trying to do. So, yeah, I'll pause right there.
And just a couple of follow-ups. Give us a sense of what you focused on primarily with your government resources. I mean, you have the lifelong learning push, but also in terms of using skills rather than qualifications as the approach, which is something that I really want us to kind of focus on. What have you been doing there?
Maybe I can illustrate with the challenge that we faced with COVID, because what COVID did was to raise the whole challenge to a new level. Businesses were being disrupted at a scale and speed that we hadn't really, expected. And what that presented to the state was a real concern about employment scarring, meaning that, we have jobs displacement en masse, and then the system not being able to bring people back. Now, what happened was that we had already invested in building up for between 15 to 20 years a system of continuous education and training, meaning that, when we were starting out by way of economic development, you could depend on the school system. You could depend on pre-employment training. And people who emerge from school, they would be able to stay in employment for the better part of their work lives. But we knew from about 15, 20 years ago that this was not going to happen. That very, very prominently in a person's working life, they are going to have to be reskilled. Now, how do you do so? You need to have training providers. You need these training providers to have, credibility. You need to involve employers, because there is no point in asking a person to go through training and then whatever it is that they present to employers, employers are saying that this is irrelevant to us. So employers' involvement in designing the skills framework as well as the curriculum, that's quite critical too. So it's something that has required a huge amount of effort to pull everyone together. So there is a national credentialing system, but I would say that the secret sauce really, is about everyone coming together and recognizing that we can't afford to have all this human capital go to waste, and we are better off designing a system that enables people to be valued for whatever skills that they have gained and to be applied, in new contexts, new businesses, and also in terms of new job roles that are being created. I mean, think about it today, digital marketing, data scientists, UI, UX designers, these kinds of jobs did not exist 15, 20 years ago. And if we expected that these job roles can only be filled by people who emerge from the school system, we'd have a tremendous number of people who were underemployed. And that's a huge waste to the system, and also a great tragedy for the individuals. So we have to find a way to overcome this.
That's probably a very good segue, Alan, to you, because you've, your company is thinking about this, facilitating this. I guess a lot of people are finding their new roles via you. What's your sense of, what trends have you seen in terms of shifting towards a skill-based approach, and how are you fostering it?
So LinkedIn bases its insights on something we call the economic graph. So LinkedIn has about 830 million professionals who are part of our network. And they all have profiles, so they all provide information about themselves. And they update that information when they're using the product or when they get a new job. And they also provide skill information about themselves. So we're actually able to track how skills are developing over time and how jobs are changing. So since 2015, almost all the jobs we see have changed in terms of their skill composition, about 25%. So if you look at the list of skills in 2015 and those in 2021, 25% difference. And we expect that difference to continue to increase, as a matter of fact, to double that amount by 2025, which is a huge change. And to your point, exactly why the reskilling needs to continue to happen, because it is important to be trained for the right things as you exit education, but it's also important to be able to keep up over time with the changes which you will see once you're actually in the labor force, once you're actually working. For us, a skills-based approach has a lot of tremendous benefits for people who are hiring and for people who are looking for jobs. So just a couple. So the first one is that it has a direct tie to the world of education. One of the things we have used for years and years when we're thinking about skills is we kind of wrap them together into a single thing called a degree. And that degree, we didn't know quite what was in the box, but basically if you had that degree, then people would take you seriously as a job applicant. One of the things that Skills First allows you to do is unpack that in order to know that basically, hey, I had this job, which gave me these skills. I got a degree, perhaps, which gave me these skills. And now I can actually measure the difference between where I am and where I want to go, which means that I could reach out and find specific pieces of education which allow me to attack those things. Because some of these skills are very teachable. Not all skills are teachable, easily teachable. A lot have to be acquired through experience. But those that are teachable, the various services which have cropped up, including LinkedIn Learning, but Coursera and there's a million of them. I'm not going to try to mention them right now. All of those give the opportunity to learn specific and largely technical skills quickly in a very focused kind of way. And the final thing I'll say before we go on is the world of skills first leads potentially to more equitable hiring. Because one of the things which holds back, and I'm speaking of the US primarily here, but holds back people who come from underrepresented communities or backgrounds is the fact that their education is non-traditional. So they get it from direct experience, or maybe they get it from a school which doesn't have a well-known name to an employer. And those things have typically in the past led to them being rejected or not even considered as part of an applicant pool. But if you're taking a skills-first based approach, you can really begin to say, well, it doesn't really matter where you came from or where, which kinds of experiences led you to gather those skills. I can still consider you because I now look at it at the granular level of skills. And that is only one part, but it's an important part of building a more equitable hiring world.
And just one follow-up on that. How dramatic does the change have to be in the HR departments, in the places that are doing the hiring, to really implement a granular skills-based approach?
Well, the answer, it varies from company to company. We have observed companies who are, especially those who have had over the last few years or decades, had to take extraordinary measures to hire. They do it very, very quickly. So if you are a company that has hired software engineers, you have a very flexible HR department already, right? Because it's so difficult. So those companies have that expertise already in-house. But many companies have to learn it. And that's part of LinkedIn's commitment, is we want to make skills-based hiring easy for the 400,000 companies that are currently hiring on LinkedIn. Knowing that for some, it'll be, we do that already. But for most, it'll be, I've never even thought about that.
Can I just jump in?
Yes, of course.
There? I think our observation in Singapore is that a tight labor market helps a great deal.
It does.
Because when employers, have obviously a very large pool to select from, they are much more likely to want plug and play. Whereas if the labor market is very tight, employers are motivated to say, this is a marginal character, a marginal candidate. But if we look more deeply at the skills, actually they fit the bill too.
I love
we
that,
just have
plug
to be
and
able
play.
to, we have to be able to top it up, and we must make the effort. Because if we don't make the effort, then we will never be able to hire. So that's something to be said about, keeping the labor market tight.
So, Manny, let me turn to you now, because you at Bain have advocated for a skills-first approach. You're operating in a very tight labour market right now. Tell me how that's going.
Yeah, thanks, Zanny. I can interweave these a bit together. Bain is sort of the best and the worst of the companies in this model. We've always been skills-based development as a firm that's constantly learning. The challenge always to get into Bain is, for whatever reason, the academic requirement is so high. Once you get in, you tear up the resume. And so if you look at what's happened in the last 2 years, and I'll speak both as an employer, but also part of a founding group of American companies called 110, the 110 Coalition, where three things came together at the same time. Right? We wanted to get to skills-based hiring. We saw some of the diversity and inclusion issues around, well, if you're only going to hire, 4-point GPA PhDs, you might have not a representative workforce. And especially during the early days of COVID, that was a challenge. Now, as the world pivoted rapidly to a very tight labor market, says, how can we solve diversity, address some of our labor needs? And so the recruiting side of this, we can come back to the role of HR later, becomes very important to be able to find new sources of talent. So, you know, we gathered, it's now up to 50 companies that are trying to hire 1 million non-degreed Black Americans in that initiative. There's close to 8 million of them in the US right now, undegreed, unemployed. That's a missed population, and you can solve so many things. You can help with your diversity agenda, you can help. Now, the issue is for companies to be able to commit. You know, as IBM did. IBM, half of their jobs now don't require a 4-year degree. Walmart, the largest employer in the US, you don't need a college degree to be a store manager, a very attractive family-sustaining job. So the employers had to band together. That was the essence of the 110 group. But, you know, to actually, as you mentioned, Josephine, to have all of these folks who have had, you know, didn't complete their degrees. In some cases, they were incarcerated, came back out, or just to actually get them ready to enter the corporate workforce is a non-trivial challenge. It requires those credentialing platform companies and learning providers like LinkedIn to all come together. Some countries, like Singapore, the role of the government could be very strong. In others, it's not going to be as strong. So to actually have business and government and credentialing platforms come together to solve a big need, that was the impetus for 110. So, and the fact that we're going through this journey, not just as one company, but with IBM and Walmart and Nike and everybody else who signed up, actually makes it easier.
And do you agree with Josephine that a tight labor market accelerates this transition?
A tight labor market means we are looking for workers, and therefore we get much more creative, you know. And so absolutely, I think Josephine's right.
Shabana, give us the Indian perspective, because you're needing to find a huge number of people. It's an incredible scale, and in the healthcare sector, you know, presumably no one wants an unskilled healthcare person. So tell us how you think about this, and is there also a shift from accreditation to skills-based, and how do you think that through?
So, yeah, I'm sure nobody wants to fly a plane without a skilled pilot.
Yes.
So, but really, I think that, let me start with a nice story that yesterday at the Global Health Awards, you know, Mr. Tedros gave the award to an Indian group called Asha workers. Now, these women with basic education have been skilled to look after almost 84,000 villages in India. They have one per person in the most unreachable areas in India, and they're giving care. It's something that we also work with. We give them some amount of training and digital skills, and then some of them are able to do telemedicine. But the entire thing is that they've actually got statistics that has brought down, you know, maternal mortality. They help in the deliveries. So this is a huge plus in terms, you know, it's a validation of the word of having skilling and in healthcare. The second point I'd like to say is that, you know, if you do healthcare, skilling in healthcare, right, you've probably got the whole skilling model of everything that you need, because it's at all levels that you need. Doctors, the basic skilling that needs to be done, but they constantly have to reskill, change as technology keeps changing, that these are the people, you know, that those that are not at the cutting edge and leading it. If we have doctors that don't know how to use robotics, then, you know, they kind of get outdated very fast. But, you know, this keeps happening. The technology behind in healthcare requires a huge amount of skill sets. And then as you come down the ladder, you need the nurses, you need the paramedics, and you just need the basic workers that can help people as they age. And if we can do this entire thing right, I think it's a huge opportunity for the world. But what Manny said, it's absolutely right what you said. You need government, you need you need institutions, and you need for training, and you need accreditation. None of this is a smooth experience in the world. Not even so in a country. Forget, we've not mastered that. But the opportunity that we're actually gunning for, without, you know, in India, because there's so many states, health is a federal subject. And so education was, you know, all over the place. So we had to, it's like we're in healthcare, but we can't be in healthcare. We can't grow unless we started our own educational institutions. So we had to skill them through that. But if there was resources, and that's why we have something like med skills that we've done, 200,000 people that we've trained during COVID, the nurses. And when you talk about tight labor markets, we have to think about a fact in that is that not all the world is tight. But if you had good regulations across cross-border labor moving, we would be able to provide the NHS with doctors or nurses, or Japan for their aging population.
Absolutely.
These are all models that are now taking place. And you apply the same healthcare model to everything, whether it's a UI UX that can be done anywhere in the world, and Ukraine had some of the best. But around the world, so you apply it to every single industry, and you'll find that the framework tends to be the same.
That's a really interesting point. Just one follow-up for you, because the shift to thinking about skills rather than thinking about degrees or bits of paper or accreditation even is one that does allow you to have a much larger labor pool. It makes I can see how the globalization of services moves very easily that way. But how do you, in somewhere like healthcare, how do you balance the need for having a sense that the skills are really there with the more novel forms of skill-based approach? So are we going to go to a world where doctors have to go to medical school and have to tick, 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 tick? Are we moving away from that to something completely different?
I don't think we can. But what we can do is that there's enough AI and machine learning that what we're able to do is to expand these skills to all doctors. So you don't have to be trained in a Harvard, or you don't have to be trained, but we have the longitudinal data of a clinical intelligence system that we're building out. So it asks anyone the first 10 questions, and it gives them an outcome which the doctors might have missed. And through that, they use their intelligence to actually come. So you have a smoothened diagnosis, but it doesn't mean that they don't have to go to med school and they don't have to keep reskilling, especially if you're a surgeon and many of these. So I think what the point you made is correct, is that you can take skilled people, but you have to wrap it around some kind of a framework. And it has to be an accredited framework that everybody knows. So within that, and I think that's the fundamental of why we go to school, that you have to pass those exams, you have to do these things. So I don't, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I'm still not seeing a world where I can just go out and become a doctor without doing 5 years.
Are you seeing that world?
Well, because Cleveland Clinics is part of our 110 coalition. You mentioned, would you like to fly a plane? United Airlines is part. It's not the jobs in any company are very, very different. There's lots of jobs in the airlines if you want to create jobs. There's more flight attendant jobs than there are pilots' jobs. There's more nurses' jobs than doctors' jobs. So skill at the job level and almost at the country level, where the choke points are very important. And the role, so you did say even pilots, United has a huge program to train pilots. And you could say, do you need a PhD in aeronautical engineering from Purdue University to be a pilot? It might help. But really, all the skills, if the company is making an investment for the highly skilled jobs, because they want to be as safe as the customers, I think all the companies are going through each of their jobs. That's the whole premise to a skills-based platform. There are very different jobs with very different skills. What do we need to train?
That's really. I just want to tell the audience that I hope this to be a conversation. So please do just wave if you would like to be part of this conversation. Yes,
Zanny,
go ahead.
just to jump in there, I think it's when you spoke about that, as much as a tight labor market might help you be creative, it's also important that companies are now learning to grow their own timber. Yes. It's not just hire at will. Unless you do it, only then will you start investing in, like for instance, my pharmacist today runs 4,500 pharmacies. He's the CEO. Yeah. And I think that progression of within growing your own timber is also where a lot of skills of the future would come. And there's a new word which is called the precariat. Have you heard of it? Yeah. So the skill framework for them is so different from the skill framework of some of the people that we're addressing, the higher ends.
So if I can return to Zanny's question, I think the essence of it is that to what extent, will there be less reliance on a piece of paper? Yeah. The fact that you've gone to university. I think it really depends on the particular domain. In certain domains where the employers have found a way of assessing people's skills and found a way to advance people on the basis of their skills, then I think there will be less reliance on, the kind of paper qualifications that a person has. I think in tech it's happening like that.
Yes.
For all the top companies, well, you may have a very nice degree or you are going to get a very nice degree. For the purpose of their hiring, they're still going to put you through a technical review. Yeah. And unless you clear the technical review, we're not taking you on board. And even if you didn't have a paper, your technical review was perfect, I tell you, you're hired, and actually there's going to be a premium paid for your skills. So in those areas, I think very clearly the skills-based approach is going to become prominent. In some of the areas where, a way of assessing people is not quite so readily available, the degree is still a proxy. Your educational certification still gives the employer some assurance of your baseline capabilities. And then on top of that, they will have to train.
I do think it actually reflects some necessary changes in the way the interviewing process actually occurs. So one of the things that we like to attack for both questions of diversity and inclusion in hiring, but also for a skills-first approach, is that what you're really building is you're building a cloud of potential candidates around a particular role. So you're going to pick the ones you think are best and talk to them, but the great thing about having a potential cloud of people you might hire from is you can take people from traditional backgrounds and from non-traditional backgrounds and from unexpected, like people who are just like really smart and they walked in the front door depending on the role. So that basically you have an opportunity to see many types of people as they come in. And it's actually very powerful because one of the things which the skilling approach teaches us is that there's actually a lot of similarity between job A and job B, way more than you would think there is. So basically, if you look, we use this, we talked about it internally, but the difference between a bartender and a customer service representative is only about
tiny.
It's
right?
it's about 30% of your skills.
Yeah.
Right? So basically, you need to add a little bit, and then you can do that because a lot of the soft skills you have are already in place. So what that means is that that basically we should look for a future where the set of skills you have is the step up to the next set of skills. Yeah. We're not talking about seeing lots of situations where somebody goes from unskilled to software engineer, but rather goes from...
We like to describe this as skills adjacency.
Skills adjacency.
Go to the right, go up
step
one.
Step up.
I'd love to bring in somebody from the audience who has a view on how far you think this transformation has gone. Yes, gentleman right there.
Thank you. My name is Dipankar Trihan. I'm a global shaper from India. Thank you, the panel, for such interesting insights. I have a two-part question, if I might put across to the panel. One is that traditionally, when we talk about upskilling, reskilling, skill development, our mindset is sort of limited to digital and future skills, AI, machine learning, data. My question really is how important are soft skills, teaming, teachability, ethics, integrity, compassion, to this skills-first global frameworks of skills approach? And if it is very important, then why are we not talking enough, or isn't there enough action on developing those soft skills in our population?
That is a great question, and I'm going to start, Alan, with you. How do you think about that in the LinkedIn framework? Is LinkedIn very good at assessing those soft skills?
So we bring technical skills and soft skills together as part of the same skills taxonomies. The depth and variation of the soft skills is much lower because the type of skills you're actually talking about tend to be called the same things in many, many, many different roles. So there's a sort of separation between a technical skill, which is easily teachable, more easily teachable through a classroom environment or an online environment, and soft skills, which are most easily taught in the actual workplace. So we would, and this actually brings kind of an interesting insight that we have from the pandemic, but we would love to see, especially people at the beginning of their careers, participate in the workplace, where they can begin to build the set of interpersonal capabilities, collaborative capabilities, which you learn best by observing others executing them well. As a matter of fact, we see, and this is a little counterintuitive, that when we look at it, when we survey our members, that the millennials, the youngest generation, actually wants the remote jobs the least of the sets of people we see. And the reason they give us is that they need to be in the office to learn from other people.
They need to apprentice. They
don't have any relationships they can call on. They want to be there in those first 3 or 4 years of their career, interacting with other people. So those of you who employ a bunch of people, remember your millennials who you hired 2 years ago have not acquired any soft skills yet. So make sure you bring them in and help them develop them, because they want it.
They want hybrid.
Well,
They want hybrid.
Exactly
They've been spoiled by staying at home. I mean, we're seeing this
but
with
not
You're
fully
seeing that?
remote.
You're seeing that? Because this is
with all our tech, but you can't get, you can't have a nurse saying that I want to work from home. So, or they have to show up, and that's a big divide when you talk about soft skills. I think that the largest number of workers that have transitioned is the delivery workers, especially in India and other countries. Huge number of them, and I think that those are the people that don't want to stay stagnant. What are the skills next for them? So the soft skills is something that is highly applicable. And if you look at another, I mean, construction is something different, but these are the big, and agriculture, so these are the big employers. And until we can put some focus on what we can do to improve those livelihoods through skills, countries will be left lagging.
Yeah, if I could add, I really appreciate the question, Dipankar, because often we'll see technical skills are the screen. You make the final decisions on soft skills. But remember, the job's not done when you enter the company. The single biggest thing you can do to solve things like a talent crunch is keep them longer. You have to have your people actually succeed. So there's a lot of soft skills required to interact with other people, perhaps, it depends on, again, the job classification. And so we think you can find for that. We think you can apply analytics to soft skills as well. And then maybe the ultimate soft skill of all, which is maybe a controversial, loyalty, right? Yeah. Because, if you have less turnover and companies, and whose responsibility is that? Is it your responsibility of your company to say, I want to make this company so great that none of you ever want to leave? Or is that the responsibility of the worker, or that says, I actually want to give back to the company and not take that so I can apply it elsewhere? And so is loyalty a soft skill, I'd say?
We give them a purpose.
Yeah, give them a purpose, a mission.
Healthcare or something.
That's quite a. Is loyalty a soft skill? Wow, there's hands going up here. Yes, gentleman here.
Hello, my name is Andrea Latino. I'm another global shaper from the Lausanne hub here in Switzerland. You talked about this framework, and I was thinking that a huge undertaking that has to be taken by companies is about the mapping of competencies internally. And not all HR departments, even large corporations, are equipped to be able to map all these competencies with all this granularity. We see it, for example, we were talking about digital skills. A lot of companies are not able to assess the level of digital skills inside their population, intergenerational level. So like the more senior people, if they have them, if they don't have them. Actually, in my experience as a consultant, a lot of these things, they don't want to actually look into it because they are scared about what they would find. And in this sense, how can we implement the framework that you are suggesting if companies don't want to look into their own belly?
Interesting.
That is a very good one. I'm sure all of the companies represented here absolutely know the competencies of those. But do you, from a government perspective, is that something you've noticed, that there is a constraint because you simply don't know the
I think maybe
skill competencies?
I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we still had companies that were very uncomfortable with the idea of, mapping out the skills, competencies of their workforce. And I think that's been a huge change in attitudes. And I think it comes from the fact that they do recognize that unless they are moving in that direction, they're going to be so far behind. But I would just also add this. I worked a great deal with the labor unions as well. And I've always been very interested what motivates a worker to want to take up training, because there is a commitment of time. It means time away from work, which is income. It means time away from family. And workers are very practical. Unless employers are going to value the training that I'm going through, then no amount of persuasion by the government or even by the labor unions themselves is going to get me to move. So I would say that the employer's involvement is critical. Employers have to be committed to this. Employers have to link whatever training intervention is being invested in to their changing business strategies and the new kinds of ways in which they expect to succeed. When workers can see that, then they will really be motivated to acquire the competencies. It's just that.
That's really interesting. Any questions on this side? I've heard lots of questions. Right, lady in the back there, yes.
Hi there. So another question from the Global Shaper. I'm from Ukraine, and I have a question about how do you envision the educational system, schools, if you would design it from scratch? Because like what I feel now, like we have the skills in school, like how to pass the exam, right? How to pass the work that you need to bring. What if we need a different approach? What is the approach? Thanks.
That is we could have the next 3 hours on this, but that's a terrific question. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so we don't have universities represented, but actually I was at a forum like this not that long ago with a university leader of Purdue, and I'm on several school boards. So there is a role of this educational system, and I don't know how far up you want to go to the university. So they recognize this, right? They think if their product, if I want to think about it that way, are graduates that then the companies need to reskill and retrain, they've arguably have not achieved their goal. So I do think they have to think about a little bit more, vocational elements, a little bit more soft skill elements, and frankly, beyond just the actual graduates they're making themselves, to scale this up, can you go broad? And so the universities that are putting their curriculums on widely available, that also helps. But they have to be, they need to have a seat on the table, right? And so I'd argue here, and you mentioned Ukraine. I will mention back to one thing that's, how many million Ukrainian and refugees from many countries around the world who are going to be moving, maybe moving back, hopefully, have to go through a reskilling agenda. So this is really important.
Absolutely.
But if I could add an observation that I've made in Singapore, is that I think the students are voting with their feet. The students, by their choice of what to do, for their duration, especially in institutes of higher learning, and for us, we're thinking of universities and polytechnics. It's quite interesting. It's not uncommon anymore for students to take whole semesters off. And it's also not so uncommon that students are able to persuade their parents that they're quitting school because they are going to have their own startup, and there is no certainty of success. But a good number of parents are willing to support these kinds of actions. Now, these are all signals to university and polytechnic administrators. They know that in terms of the curriculum, they are going to have to, revamp what's being made available. Students are saying it's okay for us to clear modules and graduate, but we also know employers want us to bring real skills to the table. So we are opting for internships. We want to be able to go, spend some time in industries. We want to spend time in social service agencies, non-governmental organizations, because we think that our skills and talents can be put to good use, and we want to build a portfolio for ourselves that is more persuasive to the employers. Now, this is not yet happening in a very large scale, but university administrators are already noticing, and therefore they have to build it into their curriculum. They have to design their curriculum differently, that the students will be able to satisfy this innate desire in them.
But Jennifer, if I can just come in.
Josephine.
I think that most kids graduating from school don't even know what they want to do in the future. And they will probably change their job maybe 3 times in their life cycle. So if I had a chance to change education, I would make sure that that exposure into different fields or something that they can, you said it's a gap year, but I think right from the school level, they need more exposure to what the possibilities are based on their own, skills or whatever that they have, their aptitude, things like that. And it should be at a school level.
Yes.
You
mean not so much universities and...
Yeah, it should start at a school level.
Right.
Do you have an aptitude? Is this what you want to do?
Yes.
And expose
what their
them
inclinations
to that.
are.
Because right now, I mean, in India, of course, it's rote learning. You have to get 99%. Otherwise, you won't get into a good university and things like that. Some of this should be more relaxed. So you have so you have a layer of giving them time to breathe and understand what the real world is. I've had relatives who, was a rocket scientist who said, actually, I wanted to be a doctor, stepped off and did medicine.
And this continent has a much more, has an apprenticeship model that is just not used in many other countries.
The skills framework, start young to expose.
We're going to have time, I hope, for one more question. And there was a gentleman here. Yes, let's get your question. I fear that will be the last one.
Hi there, Ayman Al-Muayyad, Minister for Youth and Sports out of Bahrain. In Bahrain, we've found 2 problems that I don't know, I mean, were touched upon by Her Excellency, but I'd love to hear more about. One of the issues is a signaling issue. And so what we're seeing, rightly so, I think, is students, youths, had they had the right information at their fingertips, would be able to make the right decisions. And so as far as coursework is concerned, as far as accredited degrees are concerned, and so on, we'd love to know what everybody is doing with regards to providing them with the information of what that degree unlocks going forward. And maybe more importantly, from an economic perspective, what economic opportunities that unlocks. So for us, what we've seen is it's a very amateur way of collecting information that students are doing. Whereas historically, there used to be, in Europe, there used to be blue books that would show you what the degree, what jobs the degree would unlock and how much you would be paid for that. And so that's something that we're researching. The second thing is playing to strengths. Oddly, what we've found with youth, particularly with students, and this goes all the way to tertiary, and even government, if you will, the vast majority don't know what their strengths are. The vast majority haven't done psychometric tests. The vast majority don't know how fluid intelligence works for them, themselves. And so you would find people that are regulators that are the most agreeable people you can find. And so by virtue of that, I mean, you're in the wrong job. And vice versa, and so I find it very strange that schools, universities, career centers don't give them those tests just to help them identify what they naturally are inclined to.
And I remember it very well when I was about 16 in high school, did one of those tests, and it told me I should become a librarian, which I failed.
But to that point, so I've seen this in sports. So I'm Minister for Youth and Sports. In sports, you would sit with the youth very early on, and you would measure bone density for them, and you'd give them the records, right? You'd measure their metabolism, and you'd give them the records. You'd look at their size, you'd look at their dimensions, and you'd tell them, by virtue of all of these, by the way, these are things that you're naturally inclined to do, and then you can send them off, and they can make their own decisions. But I don't see it in education.
We have 58 seconds, which is going to be, but we're going to go a little tiny bit over. I'd really like all of you to have literally a 30-second last word, responding to that, or indeed bringing what you think is the main takeaway from this conversation. And I'll start with you, Josephine.
Well, I would say that the skills revolution is going to be with us for quite a lot more years. And we all have a vested interest in making sure that, the people in our countries are able to transit to the future and succeed. So there is a lot at stake, and the more we are able to exchange notes on how best to do this, the better off we're going to be.
Thank you. Mine.
You know, I said, speaking for the set of employers, I think this is a solution to multiple challenges we collectively are facing all at the same time. You know, more talent needed, more diversity needed, more inclusion. So let's keep at it.
Shivani.
I think that there are two frameworks. One is for the, highly educated, and the next is for, a lot of workers. But for both, having the skills in place would really make it, give them economic independence. Both of them are working towards the same goal of economic independence and creating that equality. So whatever that we need to do around it is things that I think that people who have the ability and the privilege should double down and invest.
Thank you. And Alan, you get the last word.
So the skills first framework gives us an opportunity to look at the world of matching, at the world of preparedness in a much more granular way. And in some ways, we're applying a much more rigorous view of what's actually possible. And thinking about your question, armed with the knowledge that being able to see exact skill matches brings to the table, I think should be one of the things that we can put in the hands, maybe of educators, maybe of the government and so forth, but most importantly of a person who can help another person along. I think it is impossible to overstate how important someone who cares about you and your future and is willing to bring their intelligence to the problem can be. But that intelligence can only be effectively applied with a rigorous understanding of what actually would be the right thing for that person. So let's continue to invest in those people and getting them all the information they need.
Well, there's a long way to go still, but clearly a lot of progress has been made. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.